you know it's yours truly, Kevin Satterhan Singh, in the Shakti String Studio. Oh my baby Guyana, I love you for life. Oh my baby Guyana, I love you for life. I won't ever leave and go, baby. I just want you to know, darling, that I'll always be here for you, and my love is always true. It don't matter where I go, I will always come back home.
Program.
Hey, thanks, Charles, and welcome to our listeners.
Thank you. And tonight's topic to our audience will be oil production, violating safety limits, and the lack of sufficient coverage for a massive oil spill. Dr. Adams, before we get into our discussion tonight, of recent, the Vice President made some derogatory comments about you. And he called you an unsavory term, which, it reminds me of, was it Sparrow who says that, answer me fast, who's civilized and who is the, and I don't want to say the rest. But Dr. Adams, for our viewing audience and for those who listen on radio, can you tell our audience what your qualifications are? Where did you study? And what is your experience in the oil and gas sector?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Charles. And by the way, I'm not sure who takes the vice president seriously anymore. The people that recognize, competence and qualification, those are the people that matter internationally, by the way. But anyway, I'm a proud product of Linden, the alleys of Christianborg, where I grew up, and of course later on in Albaiston. So I came from a very humble background. The reason why I've committed myself to giving back to my country so that those folks who came from my background would have the same opportunity. So I was given the opportunity of going to the University of Guyana after I played cricket for Guyana, by the way, and I got into an automobile accident when I just broken into the Guyana team, and as everybody else, we want to play for the West Indies. And at the tender age of 19, after just breaking into the Guyana team, I got into an automobile accident and had to change my course, going to the University of Guyana, and became so happened that I was in the first class of engineering graduates to graduate with a bachelor's degree in civil and environmental engineering from the University of Guyana, the very first class. And we were set up specifically to start the Guyana Water Authority. So my first career was really as a well drilling engineer with the Guyana Water Authority. So I was responsible for drilling all of the water wells from the Demerara River all the way to the rest of the whole eastern part of the country. I drilled, and many of you maybe all the wells in Georgetown, South Granville, Torkine, Victoria, go all the way. And I was an engineer responsible for designing and I hope that they're still functioning. But anyway, so after that, I left and had to serve a 4-year contract with Guyana Water Authority. Now it's GWI. Came to the United States to do my master's. I did my master's in hydrogeology, which is the same thing, groundwater and that type of stuff. And then I got the petroleum industry was getting very hot, and of course you're dealing with water is below the ground, so is petroleum, except that you're getting into three-phase fluids into one, which is oil, gas, and water in the petroleum reservoir. So I got curious and decided I wanted to do petroleum engineering. So I went to one of the best schools, the top 4 schools at the University of Missouri, Rolla, and Missouri School of Mines. And I was pursuing I got my master's degree in petroleum and geological engineering, specializing in reservoir engineering. And then I was pursuing my PhD in petroleum engineering. Then of course, my wife got pregnant with our 3rd kid. I'd finished all my coursework, working on my dissertation. My wife got pregnant, and so I left and so I got a second master's degree, of course, and so they gave me 6 years to come back and finish, but I never returned to finish. So I went on to work for American Oil Company in Texas, which is now British Petroleum. So I was there as a senior petroleum engineer. I developed, I was one of the pioneers that developed even there's some enhanced oil recovery, carbon dioxide flooding. I was part of that pioneering group that developed that technology that is being used right now in all, like in West Texas and even in Trinidad. I understand they're using one of it. That's being responsible now for increasing the oil in place in terms of recoverable oil because of that new technology to increase the recoverable oil. So I didn't finish my PhD. And then I left there, went to the Department of Energy after the oil industry went bust in the 80s. I left the oil industry, and after 6 years, and then I went to work for the U.S. Department of Energy, which was probably the best thing that ever happened. As an engineer, started as an engineer, and believe it or not, this little boy from the poorest community in Guyana worked his way all the way to the top of the government to be part of that, what is called a senior executive corps. Or before that, when I moved to Tennessee to work with the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, I went back to school and did my PhD in environmental engineer. So I don't know of anybody else who's got both specialized degrees in petroleum and environmental engineering, and extensive experience in both fields also. So that's a really unique background that really helped me out, of course, when I returned to Guyana. But anyway, within the U.S. Department of Energy, I started as an engineer and worked my way, and then became part of the senior executive corps, which is the highest ranking civilian officials that run the day-to-day operations of the government. So when a president comes in, they appoint their cabinets. Well, we were the equivalent of them. They come and go. We had to take the same oath of office before a judge and that type of stuff. But they come and go while we remain as a career professional. But we're the ones who ran the day-to-day operations of the government. It so happened that among some of my responsibilities, in some cases, I was responsible for some major components or states that had the nuclear weapons complex of the nation. So I was entrusted with that high-level position, being in charge of the major nuclear weapons complexes of the United States. And on top of that, I was also responsible for science, running, managing a lot of the science, because the Department of Energy, a lot of people don't know, the Department of Energy owns and is responsible not only for energy, but we build and maintain the nuclear weapons complex for the military. They don't do that. When they're ready to use it, we transfer it to them. We also own and are responsible for all of the science. We own all of the national laboratories that develop those sciences. So I was, like I said, I was at the highest level of government, which is the equivalent of the military generals. That's our equivalent, the military generals. So here's this boy again, this little poor boy from Christiansburg that came this far and operates at the highest level of government. And then internationally, of course, I represented the United States, leading technical delegations to various international conference. I was chairperson for two major conferences, one in Germany and one in Kazakhstan. I led the delegation, and I was the chairperson for planning it for 2 years and headed those delegations. And I represented the United States at the International Atomic Energy Agency on 2 committees. So I was a person representing U.S. in 2 committees, and a whole lot of other things that I was involved in internationally representing the U.S. So, I know that I've accomplished a lot, and that is why a lot of people ask me, you're retired, you're happy, you're okay, you're not, wanting financial or anything. Why are you involved in this politics and stuff? But that's not the reason why I do that. Like I said, I came from a very poor and humble background in communities such as the Alleys of Christiansburg and Albaistam. And if I can come out of there and did what I did, so can they. It has nothing to do with where you came from. So that's the reason why I'm committed. And even before I went back to Guyana, while I was working for U.S. government, when after Guyana came off of what was called a sensitive list of countries where people like myself couldn't even go. But when Guyana was removed, I think it's around 2000 or something, I was allowed to go back to Guyana, and so I was head of a hometown association, Linden Fund USA, and every year I used to be in Guyana 3-4 times a year, doing service, voluntary service, bringing home medical missions, and education missions, and working with the Guyana government, which was the PPP government. I still maintain things that it's a farce. To say you're checking a box is the same like having the meetings during cricket. You're checking a box to say you're having the meeting. So that's what an EIA is. Now here's the other part that is interesting. The lady said, this is especially from ERM, what we focus on was what the risks are so we can put the right measures into place. Well, that measure that it's supposed to be putting is 120,000 barrels per day, safety limit cut off. But here's the other part. To manage that risk, and so that really comes down to an oil spill response plan. So remember what I told you what an EIA is. It defines the risk, what can happen in different scenarios. It can say you may have the well blowing out, and we can have 80,000 barrels or 100,000 barrels per day in the ocean for 100 days or 50 days. You make that determination. And then you've got to come back now and say, okay, the EIA tells you how are you going to respond to something like that if it happens? Or how are you going to prevent it? Well, one of the prevention measures is setting your safety limit to 120,000 barrels per day. The second part is how are you going to respond to it? And that's where this oil spill response plan comes in. Well, guess what? When the oil spill response plan came to me when I was at EP, I refused to sign it. It was the worst. I've never seen a reason. It didn't have, any reason. Imagine you have the entire coast. There's no kind of coordination. Nobody knows who's their responsibility. Normally, you would have a control room that is coordinated. I refuse to sign it at the EPA. I know most likely the EPA has now signed it, but because it was prepared by the CDC, the Marine, the guys from the GDF, the CDC, Civil Defense, they were the ones who were responsible, and I refused. The EPA did not sign that document. It was not only me alone. The Auditor General of Guyana said it was a very poor document. He said that. What happened was when I arrived, the Liza 1 permit was already signed away, so I had no control over that. And all it said is that, which is from the contract, which was one of the biggest flaws in the contract, that said that there could be self-insurance. Well, EPGL, which is a subsidiary of Exxon, had no assets. It said it was a newly formed company that was going to build its asset off of oil production. So how the heck, how could they be self-insured? If something happens the first day that they start exploring or producing, how are they going to cover whatever liability if you get a spill? They have no assets. So when they brought the permit to me, I said, well, you got to be out of your mind. I said, who is going to cover if something happens, if you have a spill? They said, well, the contract says we can self-insure. I said, well, I don't care about the contract. You will not produce a barrel of oil unless you show that you will be covering, that the government will not be responsible for a single dime. They started to push back on threats and all kinds of stuff. And I said, you see what's sitting on my desk? The guy even said, hey, it's going to cost us $1 million a day. They were bringing in to do the yellowtail exploratory stuff. Well, he says it's going to cost us $1 million a day to bring in the rig. I said, you see that permit on my desk? It's not costing me a dime. So who has the incentive? Well, when they saw that I meant business, they went out. And that is how we got the language, Charles. I wrote that language myself that says, and it said very simple, because they went out and they got insurance. And I think it was wrong. When I added the numbers, it was about $2 billion. He showed me the insurance documentation it was from a London company. And then he was grinning from ear to ear. And I said, wait a minute, did you know what the spill in the Gulf cost? At the time, it was around 70 billion. I said, so what's going to happen with anything over that 70 billion? Who's going to cover that? He said, well, that's his management is not going to support that. I said, well, you're not going to produce any oil. So we crafted a language. And here's what the language said. The language said, thou shalt have insurance. And I really didn't care even if the insurance was $1. Here was the kicker in that, which is what the judge Kissoon ruled and really slammed them. I didn't care. The insurance didn't matter to me. What mattered to me, I said, okay, anything over and above what the insurance covers, the parent company has to give us a guarantee to cover it. So I didn't care what the insurance was because I was pinning it on Exxon, who has the deep pockets. Okay, so that is how this whole thing about the parent company, they signed up to it. What they told me, because this was around March, April of 2019. So this is the country manager. He said, well, but could you go ahead and sign the permit, because we've got our investors. We don't want to spook them and get them nervous. So sign the permit. We're not going to start operating anyway until 2022 in the Liza 2. So you've got that leverage between now and 2022 to pull it back here. I said, sure. So we signed it. And the next thing, well, we started negotiating. He said the other thing is there are three basic, basic parent companies: Sunuc, Hess, and Exxon. So he said, what we're gonna have to do, Exxon alone cannot make this decision because the country manager works for Exxon, because EPGL is a subsidiary of Exxon, not Sunuc. So he said, before we can sign it, we have got to have an agreement among the three companies, Sunuc, Hess, and Exxon, as to how we're going to share such liabilities. So they went ahead. So they were negotiating. So during COVID and all, they were putting together drafts among the three of them, and they were coming to our office, meeting with our lawyer, bright, brilliant young lawyer, meeting with him, and then he would bring it down to me and say, okay, so we would tweak it, and then they would go back. And well, what had happened? So here comes August of 2020. And of course, now the Payaro permit comes up for signing. And I said, well, I will not be signing that Payaro permit until you sign the Liza 2 parent company guarantee, which would cover all the projects. Well, that made them now started hurrying up. We were at a final draft to be signed in August, the first week or so of August of 2020, when they sent me on leave. And as soon as they sent me on leave, they went ahead within weeks and signed the Payaro. And forget, so that's so we had, they had already agreed. We made, and here's the other thing that was egregious too and despicable, Charles. Not only, it didn't matter, I didn't want to leave that because the EPA was really making a lot of progress. The young, bright attorney that I'm telling you about, they got rid of him. They got rid of him because he was standing up to Exxon. We took Exxon to court, as a matter of fact, when they had like six little spills, and we fined them the maximum we could find, which was only $500 US. They refused to pay it. And we decided to take them to court because we know that was a slam dunk. He took them to court, and as soon as I left, this current government withdrew the litigation, and then they dumped this parent company guarantee, and then they went and they add a clause. They add a clause in the permits now to say that this parent company guarantee has to be based on an estimate. When we had, it was unlimited. So that's where you had this unlimited. So that was when they were taken to court. And when they were taken to court, that was when Judge Kissoon slammed them and said, you guys full of nonsense. This here was, as a matter of fact, his language was, this was vanilla clear language. I know because I wrote it as simple as you could get. It says you have to have insurance, and the parent company guarantee has to cover all. It says all liabilities above that insurance. It didn't say part, as what they were attempting to do. But they weren't smart enough, Charles, because they did not remove my language. They left my language here and add this Weasley clause in there to start talking about an estimate. And the judge really took them to task for that, because then you have a permit that has conflict. Of course, they went to court. The judge slammed them. And then the government, imagine the government, it was a way out for the government. You would have thought it was a way out to say, well, okay, well, we got to go along with the court. Instead of doing that, the vice president went and started using threatening language against the judges, saying that, they've got to, their decisions got to be, what, I can't remember the words he used, but it was threatening language to the judges, to the judiciary. And so, in any case, the government went and joined Exxon to appeal their own permits. They appeal against their own permits. So here's what they've agreed to, which was published afterward. They have now agreed to have a $2 billion liability. So tell me now, Charles and the Guyanese people, the Gulf spill cost what again? 145 billion. We had a little spill of just 12,000 gallons of oil in Peru recently. Peru government had to hold the passport of Repsol officials. They couldn't leave the country. And then the Peru government had to sue them for 4.5 billion because they refused to cooperate. So here it is. They're offering $2 billion. So if we have a spill, it costs us, let's say we got a magnitude of the BP spill in the Gulf of 145 billion, or even half of it, or even quarter of it. Let's say 50 billion. Our entire national budget is what? 3 billion. So who is going to cover, where it's 12, 15 times our national budget? It will put our country into bankruptcy, not to mention the other countries in the Caribbean. Our fishing would be gone. Our tourism throughout the Caribbean will be gone. So that would be the consequence. And this government is I don't know, it's just so distressing that here is the same guys, the people, Barra Jaglio and the president, who before they got into office, they thought it was the worst contract, how the coalition has sold out its patrimony. As soon as they get in, they're going to change this contract. But instead of that, they're kowtowing. Does anybody have any doubts as to who is running this country? It is Exxon. And do you see that Exxon doesn't say a whole lot anymore, because Barra Jaglio and the rest of the government is speaking for them on their behalf. Let me make this clear here. As you and the Guyanese people know, I've said this over and over, there is nobody who is a bigger proponent, and the Exxon guys can tell you, to the guys that I worked with before Routledge came on board, no biggest proponent than me to produce as much oil as possible, as fast as possible. The technology is there. I know of the technology. I helped develop some of those technologies. It is there for us to produce it safely. However, we've got to follow the safety rules. So I am not against producing oil. I don't think you are, or any Guyanese. We need for us to produce oil as much as possible, as fast as possible. But we've got to do it responsibly. All that Exxon is interested in is greed. They want to make money as fast as possible. And I really don't blame Exxon, to be honest, because their bottom line is, that's how those managers get their big fat salaries, is to meet production targets and to exceed production targets. That's how they make their millions. I have no problem with them making millions, but at the same time, we have got to look after our interests to make sure that all of the billions that we may get, we may have to spend back all of that money, and it may end up in a negative. Because if we've got to foot a bill to clean up a spill, anything over 2 billion, let's say it's 50 billion, where are we going to get the money from? Whatever billions we collected before, we're going to have to spend it. And what happens? We back to below zero. So those are the consequences and the concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Fellow Guyanese, you have listened to Dr. Adams very carefully. And again, OGGN's platform is to inform Guyanese, and you Guyanese will have to make a decision of what you will do. OGN is not in that position to tell you what to do or not, what not to do. But Dr. Adams is putting out very clear to us what are the consequences of an oil spill should one occur. Now, Dr. Adams, and I have a lot of questions, and I know your explanation is so spicy and juicy that I think I can listen to you going on and on. But what is the stat? I know the appeal court had increased the liability insurance to 20 billion, I believe, until the hearing. What is the start of the lawsuit? Are you any update on the lawsuit?
No, yes. Well, I think you're probably in the same boat like I am. I hadn't heard anything here recently, but what had happened? No, it's not 20 billion. It's there was some kind of an agreement made between while this thing is stayed. It's 2 billion. I think
it's 2 billion.
It's
okay.
2 billion. That was the 2 billion which was totally it was absolute asininity on the part of the government. I mean, it shows no care whatsoever for the people, but all the care and kowtowing to Exxon. That's what this is. Exxon couldn't ask for a better agent than this current government. So it's a $2 billion,
okay.
Which is nothing, which is a drop in the ocean if something happens.
Should there. Okay. I know last week, the last session we had Dr. Adams, we had Dr. Bradley and Dr. Hunt, and their topic was that make it simple. Let us count barrels rather than go through all these expenses. We know we can't even audit the expense that Exxon is giving us because of their complexity and so on.
Yeah.
But recently there were criticism leveled against the government about whether Exxon is reporting accurately its production numbers. And so, as you know, we should their suggestion that we should get our own independent measurement. The vice president said that Exxon will be building an onshore operating center with a fiber optic cable, and the government will seek access to that center to get the oil readings. But in the meantime, we'll use satellite technology to get independent measurement. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a viable option in your opinion, what the vice president is suggesting?
Well, first of all, the OGGN recommendation is exactly from day one, if you recall, that I've been recommending. As a matter of fact, there's a document when 2016 that I submitted to the past coalition government to do exactly that, to forget about this PSA contract. We have no capacity to monitor it. And my exact words in that recommendation, which is what I've talked about publicly as you go back into what I've been saying, all we need is somebody who can count barrels, which means we've got a lot of mechanics and electricians and count barrels to make sure that the meter runs correctly. We don't need to go and try to figure out cost oil and with subsidiaries of Exxon and try to audit. You see what's happening with audits, right? We don't need that. All we need is to have a few mechanics and those, in simple terms, sitting out there on site. So here's what's a little laughable. And I feel sorry for the vice president sometimes because the guy just can't help himself. First of all, he should have a cadre of technical people around him, especially when he's making these public comments, to be speaking on these topics that he has absolutely no knowledge of. So here's the first thing, which I almost fell out of my chair in a little bit laughter. He said, well, Exxon is building a operation center onshore, and we're going to use, so we're going to have this fiber optic cable to have our independent measurement. A fiber optic cable does not have independent measurement. All a fiber optic cable does is transmit data. That's all it is. It's a line to transmit data, whatever data you put in. So here's the meter, and there are meters, without question, there are meters on the ship. So when the meter comes in and the fiber optic, it's just reading what the meter. The problem is, how do we know that the meter is running correctly? That is the problem. And these meters, just do your calculation, simple calculation. These meters can go as high as less than 1% in error to probably 6% in error. Who knows, 10% in error. Could you imagine if your meter is getting, if it has that type of error, multiply that by billions. What do you get? Just 1%. 1% by multiply that by a billion and multiply it by the price of on a daily basis. We're losing billions of dollars. So what we need to have is somebody on the ship making sure that that meter is properly calibrated. Check that meter to make sure that it's measuring accurately. Not somebody sitting in some place on the on shore and talking about a fiber optic cable. So here's even the bigger joke. I thought it would have ended there. He said, well, but they're not going to do that until maybe a few years. In the meantime, we're going to use satellites. So think about this. Which satellite is going to be seeing a meter reading any place? A satellite is going to be seeing, it's a big, it so happened that was one of my forte, one of my specialties. It's called remote sensing. A satellite doesn't see what happens in the ship. It sees what happens outside of the ship. And it even doesn't even have the resolution sometimes to see what's happening outside of the ship from satellite. So it's what you feed into the satellite. If we're sitting, let's say the meter is it's normally on the inside, and that meter is running, it has to transmit whatever that meter is reading. You can't see stuff from satellite. So that was another biggest joke. So the point is, we need to change that contract from a PSA contract to what I call a concession type contract, which is what the OGGN was recommending. And I totally agree with them. It's something that I've been calling for since from like I said before, when I made that recommendation to the coalition, a matter of fact, the coalition, that and a lot of other recommendations, I was accused of probably threatening Exxon to leave the country, and I bet them my life that would never happen. So yes, but the vice president ought to let technical people speak on these matters rather than going and making and because it's misleading people, and it's irresponsible for the vice president of a country and the person who's supposed to be giving information to the country to be giving them false information. But the sad part is that I know for sure that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's just as if he's got to answer the question, and he's saying things that just to answer a question. That's irresponsible. That's irresponsible.
Okay, and maybe the vice president is building his own satellite to beam into the meter. And you're so right. The meters is in the ship itself. How would a satellite read a meter or get information? It doesn't make sense, but that is what the gentleman was saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to move on, Dr. Adams, because I have quite a bit.
But no, let me. Okay, but by the way, because this here is another serious issue, which means we've got to get people on the ship, but they've got to be trained people. At the EPA, when I was at the EPA, we went and got $1 million from the World Bank to set up a petroleum unit within the EPA. The EPA sent in an expert from Mexico who had done this before. We set up an organization with a 36-member unit with high caliber petroleum engineers. 36 members. The minimum qualification had to be between 5 and 10 years of experience and qualification in petroleum engineering, geological engineering, etc. We were ready to go look for these people in 2020, except we didn't have any budget in 2020 because of everything that happened, COVID and the election. Do you know when I left, they threw that in the trash? And they were the ones who were going to be on board what I was talking about to oversee and look. Exxon did never want that, but that when I was in the United States, we made certain that on our key facilities, we had those type of people. As a matter of fact, I was head of what we call a facility rep program, which did exactly that. We train them to each facility specifically. They go there 24/7 as long as they're operating, and they see firsthand what they're monitoring. And it's not only to see what's going on in terms of the numbers, but to make sure that they're carrying out their environmental, whatever the permit says, that they're complying. So that's they canned all of this. And then when it was brought up by the media, they said, well, I must be dreaming this up. That's what they're telling me, that I must be dreaming this up. Until the cover, this was the funny part. The cover of the World Bank document appeared on the front page of the newspapers. So when they asked the minister, he said, well, you got to ask the executive director. These were both people who were denying it every executive. When they asked the executive director, he says, well, I wasn't here when it happened, so I was not aware of it. So I guess instead of going ahead and take that as a good idea, you know what they did? They decided that they wanted to know who was leaking this information. So guess what they did? They went and they took all of Exxon's files out of the filing room that was built when I was there. We had no filing. We had no filing system, no filing room. We didn't even know how many permits or operations we had when I arrived there. All of that was fixed. We built a state-of-the-art filing system and room. They went and removed Exxon, the 2 cabinets with all of Exxon's files, and took it to the executive director office and lock it up there. So Exxon files are now being protected under lock and key in the office of the executive director. That's a fact.
Guyanese, you're listening to Dr. Vincent Adams, some very sobering information. And he said it very clear. Exxon do not have to say anything because the government of Guyana seems to be their spokesperson. And we have seen, as you said, even the cases where Dr. Kissoon, Justice Kissoon, give them a way out, the government that is, they have appealed that case against the people, against you, the people of Guyana. Dr. Adams, I know we're running out of time. Our time is coming close to an end. But I want to just ask you this question. I did some research when you were there at the EPA.